interference by tobacco farms in recent times, advocates are amplifying calls for further measures to reinforce the anti-tobacco fight so that the country can generate more revenue from an industry that continues to polarize opinion. Etienne Silva, reporting for GRTS News.
Ankara says it wouldn't let Kobani fall, days as the Syrian town comes under heavy bombardment from the Islamic State, and find out when we return how the Ebola outbreak is impacting the economies of countries like Sierra Leone. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Turkey says it wouldn't let Kobani fall. The Syrian town near Turkey's border has been under siege by Islamic State militants since mid-September. They have been bombing the outskirts and have now almost entirely encircled it with tanks, launching strikes into the town itself. There are warnings of a massacre. Most residents are believed to have fled out. Not all of them, although DWT has details.
This video shot from the Turkish side of the border shows just how close the fighting has got. A human rights group says more than 80 fighters on both sides were killed on Thursday. And there are no figures on the fate of the civilian population. Islamic State militants have surrounded Kobani on 3 sides, having captured hundreds of nearby villages in recent weeks. And the Turkish military is watching the situation closely, just a few hundred meters from the battlefront. It is poised to make a decisive intervention in the battle against IS, following Thursday's parliamentary vote that clears the way to deploy soldiers in Iraq and Syria. But Ankara hasn't given any sign of what it intends to do. Still, the vote will allow the US to attack IS targets in Syria from its Incirlik airbase in southern Turkey. Until now, US fighter planes have had to launch from aircraft carriers in the Persian Gulf. And the anti-IS coalition continues to grow. Australia's Prime Minister says its Air Force will carry out sorties in Iraq, but not in Syria.
Yes, it is a combat deployment, but it is an essentially humanitarian mission to protect the people of Iraq and ultimately the people of Australia from the murderous rage of the ISIL death cult.
But Australia's deployment will not protect the inhabitants of Syria's Kobani. The town is now reportedly almost deserted. Many inhabitants have fled to Turkey, and Kurdish militias are preparing for a desperate battle for control of the bordered town.
Protesters in Hong Kong say they are calling off talks with the government aimed at ending the standoff. The move comes after opponents of the pro-democracy demonstrators attacked the rally site and tried to drive the demonstrators away. Student leaders accuse the authorities of not doing enough to protect them.
Democracy protesters in Hong Kong standing their ground for the 7th day. But now the mood seems to be changing. This was the scene in another district earlier. A man wrestled to the ground by protesters, accused of being a China supporter. He says he was just trying to get home.
How can one person fire so many persons?
Fueling the tension, an incident earlier today. Scuffles broke out in the Mong Kong district of the city after a group of men tried to dismantle the protesters' barricades. Some say they are ordinary Hong Kongers fed up with all the disruption, but the students say they were sent by the authorities to cause trouble. Police tried to keep the two sides apart, but for the demonstrators this is reason to call off the talks with the government aimed at ending the impasse. Lawyers holding a vigil for the protesters are sympathetic to their cause.
But I think the issue here is not so much whether the protesters are acting legally or illegally. I think the issue here is twofold. One is why are peaceful protesters being cracked down upon in this way, whether by law enforcement agencies or by thugs random thugs? And secondly, what are they fighting for? They're fighting for genuine universal suffrage.
But with the talks reportedly on hold and the authorities neither in Hong Kong or China prepared to budge, it seems impossible that their demands for free elections and free speech will be met anytime soon.
On top of the tragic loss of human life, Ebola is devastating West Africa's economies. Before the outbreak, countries like Sierra Leone boast of a remarkable growth, but measures aimed at containing the virus are also bringing business to a halt. More from DWTV.
Normally, this place would be packed with people trading and bargaining, but ever fewer produce is making it to Sierra Leone's capital because fields aren't being tilled and roads are closed. That's forcing prices up. Bad news for vegetable seller Adama Kamara.
My vegetables are more expensive because the areas that supply our produce are cut off or under quarantine. There's barely anything left. We couldn't survive without the help the government's giving us. Our country's going backwards. The schools are closed. Our children don't have class anymore. How are we meant to survive? The country is dying.
Another seller, Rugiatu Kwiki, normally buys her smoked fish just over the border, in Guinea. But since the Ebola pandemic hit both countries, she doesn't dare take the bus journey, and she can't afford to rent transport.
It makes no sense to cross the border when business is so bad. But my husband is unemployed. I have to support 4 children by myself. 2 are meant to start university soon, but I can't pay the fees. We only have enough money to buy food.
Right now, many in Sierra Leone are struggling to survive. Stores are closed, business is lean, and there's little money around. Before the pandemic, the country had been riding a mining and agricultural boom, but Ebola changed all that. Foreign investors are staying away. Economist Ezekiel Duramani Laco says it's almost impossible to run a profitable business in Sierra Leone at the moment.
Institutions, even individuals, cannot pay their loans because of cash flow problems. So this is the time where a bank will come in. They might either decide to reduce interest rates to encourage people paying their loans and encourage lending as well.
So even the healthy in Sierra Leone aren't doing well. Those with money are grabbing what's left of a shrinking economic pie. And the Ebola outbreak is stalking fear and suspicion.
We are praying that the Ebola epidemic in Sierra Leone will end soon. It's the only thing we think about. It's the only thing we talk about. It's there when we go to bed at night, when we get up in the morning. Everything is about Ebola.
People in Sierra Leone have been hoping for a brighter future. Now the Ebola outbreak is threatening to set the country back years, if not decades.
And before we take leave of you, a quick reminder of the day's main stories. President Jammeh has urged Muslims to reflect on the teachings of Islam and inculcate the act of caring for one another as the Ummah celebrates the feast of Eid al-Adha. Anti-tobacco campaigners in the Gambia amplify calls for tougher measures against importation of tobacco products, blaming companies for using the ECOWAS protocol on trade liberalization scheme as an advantage. After days of relative calm, protesters in Hong Kong said they have pulled out of talks with the government following violent scuffles between them and those opposed to their cause. And Turkey has vowed to stand by the Syrian town of Kobani as heavy selling by ISIS's militant forced thousands of residents to flee the predominantly Kurdish city. That was all in this edition of the news. Thanks for being there and enjoying GRTS. Happy Tobaski. I am Tenenjite.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin.